Thank you very much, Regan. Good morning to all of you, the citizens of South Africa and the Western Cape specifically, also to the media who've joined us. I think we're still looking for me. There we go. Thank you very much. And so welcome to the media, to the citizens, to this Digicon. We're going to be talking about the RP, but before we get there, I first of all must just pass on my sincere condolences to the Ackerman family. In the early hours of this morning, I was made aware that Raymond Ackerman had passed on. Someone who's an icon in our country, an entrepreneur, an innovator, a disruptor, someone who is a humanitarian and who leaves a massive legacy. And rest in peace, Raymond. We will not forget you, and my deepest condolences to the family, and of course to the greater Pick n Pay, and of course the South African family of Raymond Ackerman, the broader family, and so many people that he's touched in his life. I also want to just reflect on my own visit to the Drakenstein municipality this week. I went to go and have a look at the generators that are being put into the wastewater systems and the water systems. These are the generators that are being brought across our municipalities through the just short of 90 million rand that we made available in the beginning of the year, specifically for risk mitigation when we reach load shedding level 6, which we are all in again. And I don't need to remind you of it because you're all feeling it every single day. And of course, when you don't have electricity, that's one thing, but we cannot run out of water, and we cannot allow the sewage systems to be just running in our streets. There are a whole lot of other risks when we talk about that. So it was good to see that those investments are being made. The generators are now in place. These are big generators, and they take time to put in place, but they're in place. And they're doing the job when we reach these high levels of load shedding. I also had the opportunity to see the system that they've developed in Drakenstein with regards to their traffic intersections. So they have 47 main traffic intersections. 41 of them have already got battery backup systems. Really amazing technology, battery system with a below ground management system that runs those traffic lights every time there is load shedding, and that just keeps the economy going, keeps traffic flowing. And it's an amazing innovation that was partnered between government and the private sector, and I believe that they are now rolling that out, those products out to other municipalities as well. So well done to the innovators who come up with these good ideas during the times of crisis and really making a difference. Talking about that, let's talk about our own plan and how we are moving steadily forward to building resilience in our region. And so with that, I'd like to welcome and hand over to Mr. Lester. Albie, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Premier, and welcome to the public, the media, and our colleagues that have joined us on the session today. I think just to kick us off again, let's just sort of recap on what's happened in the last week and what the week ahead looks like. I think this week we've seen significant changes in our status we went very quickly from a stage 2 to a stage 3, 4, 5, and ended up at stage 6 very quickly. And I think for the last few weeks, I've indicated that there is a lot of volatility in the system, and we've seen that happen over the last few days. On Friday night, Eskom lost about 3 units, which totaled close to 1,300 megawatts that left the system during the evening peak on Friday. And this was exacerbated by the fact that there was increased maintenance that was taking place at the time. So this has actually put us in the position where we find ourselves in stage 6 for the rest of this week. And I must say, if I look at the picture, and again, this is just an annual comparison for the particular weeks of the year. So the blue line is really indicative of what happened in 2022, the kind of demand and energy that we sent out into the system. The black line is an indicator of what we forecasted we'd be able to actually send into the system. And the red line is what we're actually sending into the system every week. So as you can see, In 2022, we sent out over 31,000 megawatts in the system. So that was generation available to the country, 31,000 megawatts. When we did the forecasting for the country, when Eskom does the forecasting for the country, the black line is what they look at and they say, well, potentially this is the energy that will be available in the system to the country. The red line is actually what becomes available in that particular week. And you can see the big gap between what we thought we were going to have and what we're actually producing. So if you look at week 34, which is really sort of the last dot on the red lines, we sent out just under 26,000 megawatts, although we had forecasted that we'd be in excess of 30,000 megawatts available to the country. Again, if we compare to what we were able to do last year, we're significantly lower than where we should be. So again, an indicator that the system is struggling to actually improve. Year on year, we are actually performing at lower levels than we did before. So again, I think it speaks to both the maintenance regime, but also the fact that when repairs are being done in the system, that they are not sustainable repairs. They're not bringing us back to a level where we see increased generation available to us. If I look at the week's energy availability factor, we've seen a drop in that factor. I think we're starting to see this happen more and more routinely. Every week, the trajectory and the trend is negative. We seem to be dropping quite a bit. I know there's optimism when we get units back, but I think the trick is really to make sure that they stay in the system and they're sustainable. We've definitely increased the maintenance in the country. You can see the factor grew from 9 to 10, so 10% maintenance was done in the last week. And yes, it definitely added to the stage of load shedding we had. But you'll also see that the unplanned outage factor also went up. It went up from about 32% to 33%. Now, again, for every 1% increase, you're talking about 600 to 1,000 megawatts is what the impact is. The fact that the planned maintenance, the summer maintenance plan is now kicked in, what it does also mean is that when plant is taken out, it's not easy for Eskom to bring that plant back under emergency conditions. So sometimes, conveyor belts are being dismantled and repaired or replaced. Stacks are being replaced and repaired. And it's not as quick as, when you lose the unit, it's not as easy to bring back a unit for maintenance because those maintenance activities are actually sequenced. So it does make it quite difficult for them to recover from that. I think the concern is not really the plant that we put into maintenance. The concern is the plant that's in the system that is breaking down more and more regularly. If you look at the week ahead prognosis, I think we're very realistic in terms of where we're at. You can see in both the forecasted number as well as in the prognosis, the actual number that we see, both are in red, which means that we expect to be in load shedding from 2,000 megawatts and above. Now, most of the red that you see in the forecasted column, which is the second last column, this is really based on the fact that we are going to do increased summer maintenance. So you will see that there will be increased load shedding. I think it's just exacerbated by the fact that we now have plant that is also not coming back from service. The indications are that the Koeberg unit will come back early November. I expect that they will probably start synchronizing towards the middle or the end of October and then get full load at the beginning of November. So that will give us some relief. But at the same time, I think we must also understand that the other unit 2, will then go off. And there is this month of October that I think the Western Cape, we are going to be at risk. They'll start to synchronize the unit, but both units will effectively be off beginning of October. And so for the month of October, I think that's the biggest risk in the Western Cape, is that we're likely to see an additional stage of load shedding for this month. So if everything goes well, Eskom brings Koeberg Unit 1 back on service, that will be great. Unit 2 then goes out. So from November, I think we'll probably start to see parity between Western Cape and the other provinces in terms of the stages of load shedding that we're in. But for the week ahead, I think without a doubt, anything between stages 4 and 6 is what we should be expecting. I don't think that the maintenance regime will be reduced to compensate for the amount of load that's actually out in the system. I think the focus is now going to be trying to bring those units back that have actually gone out. So not a good outlook for the week, a tough week for everybody ahead, and I think we should prep for that. But thank you very much, Premier, and thank you, Regan. That's the prognosis for the week.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lester. Yeah, not a good week ahead. I must say that when you, I see the camera is looking for me. I must say that when you spoke last week about the week ahead and the sort of bad news hit, I couldn't help thinking of the pandemic and an epidemiologist telling us what the next week was going to look like. And I must say your message is a tough one again this week. But that just means, citizens, we've got to make sure that we are, whatever we're doing, trying to mitigate the risk. We can see it. The impact is on energy is huge. We're seeing it now in the price of fuel as well, and a huge increase in the price of fuel. But yeah, at the same time, we've got a plan, and that plan was kicked off at the beginning of this year with a 1.1 billion rand budget. Local governments added to that provincial budget of 1.1 billion, and now we're sitting at just short of 7 billion across the province. We've already started seeing municipalities going out on tender, calling for initially perhaps wind and solar and maybe battery, but now even making those calls agnostic and just saying, we are looking for energy. Please give us some energy in whichever guise that is. But really what we need, and part of our plan, is to say, what is the overall use of power in our province look like into the future? What is our integrated resource plan on energy, and how does it look? Now, that is one of the projects, Mr. Lester, that you are helping us land in the province. I know that my email is full, and I'm pretty certain yours is as well, of people with great ideas. And of course, I definitely think the opportunity for us is how we decarbon our energy system. And so obviously wind, solar and battery is going to play a prominent role into the future. Green hydrogen is going to play a prominent role into our future. But there's also the possibility of gas, and we're seeing that in Mossel Bay and in Saldanha Bay. I've had of late some people messaging me about underground thermal energy. A lot of people talking about small modular nuclear reactors. Last week we were out at a hydro energy plant that was planned, decades and decades ago, and now relieving a city of 2 levels of load shedding. So I think the resource plan is a critical framework that we've got to look at going forward. So I think it's a great idea that today we have a discussion on the proposed provincial RP. And of course, none better to speak about that than Albie Lester. So Albie, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Premier. So the provincial RP is really a critical component in our resilience plan. It really speaks to, what it is that we think we're going to require in the next 25 plus years. But more importantly, it also looks at, what the available technologies are over that span. But let me unpack it a little bit so that the audience can also understand what it is that we're referring to. So, we use the terms quite loosely, and I think people probably want to have a better understanding of what it is. But when we speak about a resource plan, an integrated resource plan, we're really talking about an assessment of what our future energy needs are going to look like. And the plan is actually, how do we meet those needs? Now, when they look at those needs, there's a number of considerations. One is the economic activity in the province. The other is the growth that's taking place in the province, both in terms of your economy, but also in terms of your population. And then how do you then expand your energy capacity to meet that increasing need? Now, I think we're sitting with a couple of very critical factors in the Western Cape. One is that we've got a growing economy, we've got a growing population, but we also have quite a big growing industry when it comes to energy. Most of your IPPs are actually based in the Western Cape. We're now looking to create some manufacturing capacity in the Western Cape around renewable energy. So all of these are actually things that need to be considered when we look at the RPs. Do you have the ability to deliver those megawatts? And do you have the value chain downstream and upstream that is going to assist you to deliver those megawatts, irrespective of what technology you choose? Now, when we look at the plan, one of the things is, what is the existing demand? How do we factor in the growth, etc.? And how will we actually meet that demand? What technologies will be applied which time? And what is the cost of meeting that demand? So this is also talking to the investment plan for energy in the province. So you can't just, decide today that you want to implement nuclear and not consider the cost of the nuclear, because that translates into a tariff, and in the end, the citizens end up paying for that. So the types of decisions we make, both in the short, medium, and long term, have to be considerate around things like, can the fiscus manage it? Can the economy cope with this? Can the citizens actually pay for this type of energy at this particular point? So cost is quite a big factor when you look at the integrated resource plan. Traditionally, the plan is only looking at the generation component. And I say traditionally because our plan is slightly different and we have got other considerations in our plan, but it looks at the generation capacity needed to meet that demand. It's considered integrated simply because it looks at both the demand side and the supply side option. So what it really means is, if you look at the available generation to you in the country or in your province, and your demand is greater than that, then your plan must also then incorporate an activity that manages the demand option that you have. So typically, do you have a DSM program in place, a demand side management program? Do you have like curtailment in place? Those kinds of options that will buy you the time to actually build new generation. So just as a reminder to everyone, our overall resilience program caters for both the demand side management program as well as our RRP, and then all the supporting legs to the RRP, which we'll speak about shortly. Now, there is a national RRP, we're well aware of it, and our plan links into the national RRP, although I do want to say there's no dependence on the national RRP. I do want to say that what's critical for any RRP is that the timeline that you look at has to be a medium to long-term window. So we are not looking at what we need in the next 12 months or 6 months, those are the short-term initiatives. Ours is very much a view of what's going to happen over the next 20 to 25 years. What do we need in the Western Cape over that period? The technology is important, but from our perspective, we are agnostic around technology. And what we really want to say is that depending on where we are in that horizon, in that 25-year horizon, that will really dictate our technology choices. And when you make those technology choices, I think the things to consider are things like the maturity of the technology. What is the cost of that technology? Does your geography allow for that technology to be implemented? And then what is the environmental impact of your choice? So typically, it's a good example. It's a very simple example. If I look at the West Coast, all our studies indicate that we are likely to look at a gas option in the West Coast and potentially solar, and then with the eventual outcome of having green hydrogen on the West Coast as well. And that's a very good example of where the geography matches very well with the technology. If you look at the Southern Cape as an example, it has the potential to do gas as well, but it also has the waste to energy potential, and it also has wind as an option. The solar yield on the Southern Cape is not as high as these on the West Coast. And again, the geography dictates a lot of the choices that we need to make. So in our provincial RRP, we are saying that we are going to be agnostic around the technology. We will look at all the potential options that we have. And if the time is right for that technology, we will then start looking at how do we apply that technology. An RRP has to be assessed. And so what we've done in our RRP is to say that we would like to do assessments every 18 to 24 months. And the reason for that is that we see how quickly the technology is actually changing in the industry. So to only look at reviewing your technology or your plan every 3 years, I think the downside to that is that you might end up having to revise your plan completely because of the change of technologies. If I look at solar and wind, fairly mature technologies in the country and in the world. Pricing is good, so it's very obvious that those would form the basis of your plan going forward. But then you look at the sort of disruptive technologies that we have coming out of the market. Green hydrogen is going to be a big player. I think at this point initially we said we're probably 10 years away from something sustainable and sizable that can help us. I think that view has changed in the market. I think that window is closer to 5 to 6 years now. Technology is moving at a rapid rate. If you look at things like battery and storage as an example, before, when we spoke about battery, I think the almost obvious choice was almost going to always be a lithium type battery. But storage options are changing all the time, and the technology is developing so quickly and rapidly that the cost of storage is also starting to see a downturn. So again, you've got to have shorter review windows given the changes in the industry. What we've also done in our RRP is we'd like to put together a review panel that can critique our RRP and also give guidance to us. And we'd like to see that this review panel is made up of individuals or entities that are either based in the country, nationally in South Africa, in the Western Cape, and also some international inputs in terms of where is the international market going in terms of energy. So we can get those views and allow our RRP to be updated quite regularly. I think the RRP has to have the big picture in mind. It's got to look at all energy resources that you have available to you. And again, I think some of the limitations that we see in the national RRP is really that we haven't reviewed it frequently enough. We've not taken account of the fact that technology is changing quickly. And we found ourselves in a very difficult position in that we're now in load shedding and we're making almost emergency choices that don't really form part of an RRP. And I think the lesson for us in the Western Cape is that we wouldn't like to find ourselves in that position. So the RRP and adhering to that RRP and actually working with that RRP constantly will actually get us to a point where we don't have to make these difficult choices in the short term. So has to look at the big picture, the long-term requirement of the country, and you've got to consider things like long-term storage options, network development associated with that generation, as well as what is your grid development options. Do you look at a microgrid system, a distributed grid system, a centralized grid system? So your RRP should really speak to what are your choices in your grid development as well. And there's many questions being asked around. So, if you have this RRP, how does it help you? I think very quickly it helps you to avoid making expensive emergency energy choices. And we've got many examples in the country of where we're doing that, but we're doing that because we're trying to save the immediate sort of future of the economy. I think the difficulty is that those are not sustainable and typically won't form part of your long-term plan. The RRP also definitely looks at the most cost-effective application of an energy solution. So what is the most cost-effective at this particular time that we can apply? It allows us to look at the appropriate technology and that we deploy it in the right windows. So micronuclear is probably one of the most sustainable solutions that you will find. There's been huge development over the years in terms of micronuclear. You can deploy these very quickly now. They come in containerized size units that go up to 8 megawatts or from 8 megawatts up to sometimes 40, 50 megawatts. And they can definitely solve our problem. I think at this point, one of the things that does concern us is, for instance, what's the cost of that? What's the cost per megawatt? Now, today, I think it could be quite expensive, but I think if we're speaking over the next 5, 10, 15 years, we might find that solution is actually quite cost effective. And again, you've got to look at the fact that you have over the last 5 to 10 years seen a 500% increase in the tariff. This year alone, we'll see an 18% increase in the tariff. So if you extrapolate that over the next 10 years, you find some of these technologies do become cost effective over a period of time. The RRP also allows us to reduce our environmental risk. It allows us to make that choices given where we are in terms of our environmental status. There's a huge drive, not only in the province, but in the country for us to move to a decarbonized economy. So your RRP has to speak to some of those objectives that you want to achieve. You won't necessarily put in your RRP that you are going to build coal-fired power stations. If your path is to a cleaner energy space, then your RRP will start to direct you. And I think that is very much my last point as well. It really does set a clear path for our energy transition and for our demand forecast. So the RRP is really our sort of guiding plan in terms of what energy should look like over the next 20 to 25 years, what kind of investment we need to make, and what kind of choices we'll need to make over the medium to short term, to long term. So a critical component of our resilience plan, I do want to say we've done quite a bit of work in terms of putting together our terms of reference for our RRP. And we hope that in the next month or two, we're able to kick off the process to get our RRP in place. And I expect that that's probably going to take us about 6 months to have that in place. But once we have that plan in place, it'll start to guide a lot of our decisions going forward. The Premier, that is what an RRP does, and this is what the RRP will do for us in the province. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Lester. We will now open the floor to questions. A few have already come through via WhatsApp. So I'll kick off the process. Premier, this question is directed towards you. You've been talking quite a lot recently about the budget crisis and this fiscal emergency that is hurtling towards the country and the impact load shedding is having on the economy, which just compounds everything. But it is an integral part of this fiscal emergency and is exacerbating that. What is your view on how we can get Eskom back working and back from the dysfunctional state that it is, and how it can support economic growth?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for that question. I mean, it's absolutely evident that it's almost like the straw. It's the thing that's pushed us into this crisis that we've got, and that is load shedding. Load shedding is taking away our ability to bring in the tax money that was expected. We've seen in all these slides, you've seen how much worse the energy situation is this year to last year. I mean, that was what kicked us into this energy plan last year, September, when we looked at the forecast as worse load shedding for this coming year than the previous year. We said, we've got to do something else. We've got to step in. And that's why we've got our own energy plan. And I think what we've got to do is we've got to enable much more private sector investment. And it's not necessarily the massively big investments. It's getting more and more smaller, almost democratization of our energy system that's going to help us in a quicker way to get energy back in. I am encouraged, although it's taking way too long, with a separation. We've been speaking about it for many years, of the grid company versus generation. We need, again, we know a big blockage is the grid system. So we're seeing some movement there. I think that also needs to have some speed and energy put behind it, because we need to get investment into our grid system, especially I think about the potential of the Northern Cape and solar. And we're seeing many investors that have already got the go-ahead through the RP process, but they cannot put any money on the ground or on the table to say, let's actually get this production going, because you can't build the plant without getting the power to where it's needed. And, those are the critical factors that we are facing now as a country. And the implication is then the knock-on to a financial crisis. So, yeah, I think we've got to put as much time and energy in as possible to remedy the shortfall of energy. We're seeing a lot of private sector investment happening almost off the grid, so to speak. How do we enable that to come back onto the grid? Because that will, if you helping yourself, can you help your neighbor at the same time? Or if you helping your business to be sustainable, have you got a little bit extra that you can put back into the system that your neighbor's future is also going to be okay? A lot of reference made to solutions that have been found, for example, in Vietnam. A lot of private sector, small power, 9 gigawatts in 1 year. That's amazing. Of course, it has to be paid for somehow, but we need to really speed some of those up. And that's, I think, exactly what we're doing in the Western Cape is, trying to get that resilience in. It's nice to see the municipalities coming out with their tenders, and we'll be seeing more and more of them coming out now, and then attracting the private sector to find and help us with those solutions. But I think the biggest thing for South Africa is going to be, again, private sector on the one side, and on the other side, making sure that the grid system is able to get the power in and send it to market. That's going to be quite critical. Of course, what we're doing is how do we do it within the municipal microgrids, smaller amounts, but that will make up the 5,700 megawatts over the next few years.
Thank you, Premier. A question for you, Mr. Lester. With the RRP effectively looking into the future, preparing us as a province for our future energy needs, what are your thoughts about how the grid will be set up and what it will look like in the Western Cape going into the future?
So I think the one thing is that the transmission grid, I think for a period will still remain a national asset. I do think that the discussion around how to get private sector to get involved in typically the strengthening, upgrade or refurbishment of the transmission national grid, I think that's a discussion that needs to be tabled and had. And the need for that is quite critical. It's one of the reasons why we found ourselves stuck and not being able to add additional capacity into the system is because the transmission grid isn't able to capacitate. So allowing the private sector to enter that space, I think will do two things. One, it will speed up the execution of capital projects for that type of initiatives. I think that's the one. The other thing is the investment will come along a lot quicker. So those are quite important. If I look at the distribution network in the Western Cape, those are really owned by two entities. One is Eskom distribution in the province and then municipalities. I think what would be ideal if you're looking at a future model of the province is that you start to talk about standardized tariff and wheeling arrangements, where customers that want to wheel across the province don't necessarily want to or need to negotiate with multiple network owners. So in an ideal state, you'd like to have an entity that actually creates sort of parity across the network in terms of pricing and wheeling and quality of wheeling. But I do think that those are a few steps ahead of where we need to be. I think in the interim, we probably have to negotiate wheeling arrangements on the networks between municipalities and Eskom and look at how do we strengthen and support, firstly, the municipal network, and then how does the Eskom network then need to be strengthened and upgraded to allow for that energy to move across the province. But ideally, you'd like to see one system in the province. I think that would be ideal.
Thank you. Just to follow on from that, I just think we need to constantly remind people, if you could just maybe give us an idiot's guide to wheeling, what exactly that is.
So wheeling is effectively a transaction mechanism, but what it means is that you've got an entity on the one hand that's got excess energy, available energy, either produced for themselves and they have additional energy available, and there is another party on the other end of the network that would like to buy that energy. But the network in between these parties don't belong to either one. And so what they have to do is they have to get an agreement with the network owner, which could either be Eskom or the municipality, to move that energy across that network. And what would be the cost and the timing to move that energy? So wheeling is really just the moving of energy. It's really a financial transaction that needs to take place between the owner of the energy and the owner of the network. And then you've got a customer at the other end that's going to get that energy moved across that network. And that's what wheeling really is about. It's moving energy from point A to point B over a network that you don't know.
Thank you. Question that's directed to both the Premier and Mr. Lester, and I think you both have touched on this, but maybe we could just elaborate on it. Does the well, as it's phrased here, does the integrated resource plan factor in the private sector? I think it does, but maybe if you could elaborate how much of a role will the private sector and private businesses and so forth play in the overall RRP? Maybe we could just start with the Premier on that one.
I was going to hand it to Elvi, but I'll I mean, it's predominantly going to be private sector. That's exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be saying, this is the envisaged energy mix, and the private sector will go, well, I'm happy to, tender and see if my company can produce, a percentage of whatever that energy mix is. So it might be wind, it might be solar, it might be battery, it might be gas, it might be some new technology, it might be SMR. That really is all the private sector. I don't know.
100%, Premier. Of the 5,700 megawatts that we've targeted for 2035, I'd be surprised if anything under 90% of that is not in the private sector. I think what we are accounting for is that there could be some generation that municipalities already have, and we'll include that in our number. But I think the sort of predominant focus is that the private sector will actually create that generation for us. So they will play a big role, and not only in the generation space. I see them playing a bigger role in the network development as well.
Question for both of you once again. Is the RRP thinking about the potential revenue loss and opportunities for municipalities and helping local governments to purchase power as groups to give them buying power?
Yeah, so let me respond to that. I think two aspects. The one is, yes, we are busy with an exercise to look at the sort of revenue impact on municipalities if we look at these distributed generation solutions and coming from the private sector. So there is an exercise to look at what the impact is going to be on revenue of municipalities. The second component to the question is, are we able to look at the benefits of, let's say, multiple or group buying? And yes, we have a project. It's a pool buying project, in fact, where we've identified a couple of municipalities and looking at the potential to now drive a business case and potentially do a pilot to say, if we were to look at, a IPP in a particular area, are we able to then aggregate the energy need from multiple municipalities and then negotiate better pricing for those municipalities for that tariff, for that energy at a particular tariff. So we're definitely looking at that and seeing, are there opportunities for us to use volume as one of the triggers in terms of better pricing.
I mean, I could only add to that at the moment, the negative impact on not having energy is massive. I mean, that's putting us into a financial crisis in this country, and that's at a national level from a tax point of view, but at a local government level, it'll be exactly the same thing. Can residents even afford to pay their bills? And then, of course, as more residents are putting in their own systems and not part of the municipal system where they are separate from the grid, that has a negative impact. But of course, the real turnaround is going to be that vision into the future where there's going to be energy trading, there's going to be their grid system, and they'll have to change the model of how they make some income through the use of their grid. They might have the customer system, the billing system, so they'll be key in the trading platform, but it definitely has to have a lot of rethinking on what that model looks like.
Okay. One last question's come through by email, and I think it's also one of those questions just to elaborate on, because we have touched on it through the course of this Digicon. What are some of the more critical metrics, factors, and criteria that the Western Cape IRP takes into account when planning for the future and the energy needs of the province? I suppose what they're asking for, is it mostly in the area of sanitation or infrastructure or education? Where are we seeing those pressures building up, and how much of a factor do those kinds of criteria play when we're drawing up an IRP?
So I think with the elevation of energy as one of the key focus areas for the province, I think it also then becomes a trigger for all other infrastructure projects in the province. If we are able to secure the 5,700 megawatts by 2035, which I think it's not a difficult ask of us, we should expect that there would be an increase or there would be additional burden placed on other services in the province. So if you get an increase in your population, additional semi-migration taking place, I think you'll see an increase in the school numbers, kids going to school. I think we'll see pressure on the transport system, on the water system, etc., etc. Now, when we talk about the IRP, so when we talk about the 5,700 megawatts, we then start to factor in that there is going to be growth. There will have to be an increase not only in the energy availability, but also in the other services that run off that energy as a trigger. So the kinds of things that we will look at, or the kinds of criteria that we will look at in an IRP, it's typically, one, the economic growth that you currently have, the projected growth that you'd like to see. how does that translate into energy growth? So normally, if you have a 2-3% economic growth, then you have an energy growth of about 1 or 2%, just 1% normally lower than your economic growth. I think, though, that the growth at the moment is stunted by the fact that you've got load shedding. So it's not really a true picture of what your growth could be. And we want to factor in, what would be real growth if you never had load shedding and if you had energy availability. I think then your growth and economic growth will be far higher than what it's looking now. So that would be the one metric that you must look at, the economic growth. The other metric that's quite important is to look at, do you have the capacity in your system to either export energy or import energy? So if you want to get to 5,000 megawatts, 5,700 megawatts, if you don't have the available generation in your system, are you able to, as an example, wheel that energy into the province so you get to the 5,700? But that means that your networks will have to be developed to be able to take that energy coming in. Ideally, we'd like to be a net exporter of energy in the province. I think have our own generation in the province and then sell off to other provinces or even other countries that border in and around the Western Cape. So critical again is to look at, is your network able to manage with this capacity? I think another metric which is quite important is that once you've started to bring those megawatts on, is to then see how your economy is actually growing. So what is your current economic activity, given the energy that you have available? And as we bring additional megawatts on, how do we see a growth in that economy? And that will be a very good indicator that we are, in fact, tackling the right problem here. So I think those are critical. There are lots of criteria that is used. When you talk about the RP, you've got to look at sort of your source of energy. Where's it coming from? Is it import, export? How does it affect, for instance, your harbors? So as an example, if gas is going to be a feature in our plan, the RP has to touch on, what is Transnet going to do in terms of some of the ports that then have to be updated to be able to cater for, let's say, gas imports. So whether that is, gas that's barged or piped, etc., how do we then look at that? And then obviously the other thing is the environmental impact. You'd have to look at, do you have to construct long lines, pipes, or is it, energy right at the harbour, or the gas right at the harbour that is then changed into energy and then used on the transmission and distribution networks to get to the areas that we needed. So there are a whole host of things that are considered in the RP, but I think most critical is going to be things like your cost, your technology, your maturity. Those are the critical ones you need to look at.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mr.
I also think that, for me, the opportunity is about the economy and market access. So at the moment, we can see our markets are setting lines in the sand around carbon footprints into the future. So it is also an opportunity. There's a crisis at the moment, but the crisis is an opportunity for us to almost get ahead of our competitors in the world. If we're thinking about agricultural exports into the EU, for example, that say by 2030, you need to be at X, Y, and Z carbon neutral. This is our opportunity to be reducing our carbon dependency and then able to show markets what we're doing, and then through that we become more competitive. So there are other advantages that come out of this crisis, which I think are going to be beneficial. And then, it's also about gas coming in and the infrastructure, but also the potential at the same time about green hydrogen and perhaps it's ammonia or whatever going into some new market somewhere else.
Great. Thank you for those questions. Now return to Mr. Lester with your useful tip for the week. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Regan. So for this week, I think if you are either in an office or a home setup and you have either air conditioning or heating from a centralized system, what you could do quite easily is an hour before you leave, switch off the aircon, switch off the heater. The room will retain that temperature for at least another hour, but you would have saved energy for an hour. So if you're going to leave at 4:30, 5:30, whatever time it is, an hour before, you can switch off that aircon, you can switch off that heater. The room temperature will remain the same, but you would have saved quite a bit of energy and quite a bit of money. So we must try that. Thanks, Regan.
Thank you, Mr. Lester.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Lester. Thanks, Regan. Thanks to the team that enable us to put on these Digicons, because it's all about keeping you, the citizen, updated on our plans, where we are, and especially at this time that is so difficult, sitting at the load shedding levels that we're sitting at. That's really tough. I think about the comment that's just been made about heat, and you think to yourself, gee, but that's such a simple thing to do and can save you energy costs. But also, I think about the saving for everyone else, because it's just using less power. The same thing, just don't forget to turn that light off as you're walking out the room. But the heat has been turned off an hour before. Oh, it's just so simple and so easy. But thank you very much for joining us at this Digicon. See you again next week. Cheers.